Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the 3:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time session, Best Practices for Mitigating OT Cyber Risk, sponsored by Fortinet. Please take a couple moments if you're not acclimated to Zoom and locate the Q&A window and also the chat boxes. You'll be able to use these tools throughout the session. And if you could, just in the chat, I'd invite you to share where you're located today, so we've got a perspective on where the folks are dialing in or zooming in from, as they say. We have a few housekeeping items that I'll address quickly before we dive into today's session. We are being recorded, so it will be available on demand in just about 2 days from now, and we'll send out a follow-up email after that. So there are several upcoming dates. We have several IoT World Day events on smart cities in June 16th, August 12th for an energy-focused event. The 6th is an ICS Cybersecurity Day, and then we'll cap off the year December 8th on another manufacturing focused. Now, we will be taking questions during this session, so interaction is encouraged and highly recommended, so feel free to submit those into the Q&A window if you can, and not the chat. Feel free to chat and have conversation in that window, but the questions direct to the Q&A, because that's where the team and I will be looking for those. If you want to submit questions via the social channels, LinkedIn and Twitter, please use hashtag IIoTWorldDay. That's IIoTWorldDay. This track will run for approximately 45 minutes, and we'll make sure to get you out here on time so you can head up to the next event. The thought leadership that you're about to hear and receive through these sessions, it would not be made possible without our sponsors. So a huge thank you to Alientia, Canvas, Eurotech, Hitachi Vantara, HiveMQ, Fortinet, Losant, Trend Micro, Ursuleo, Vertex, and Wellaware. So just a bit about IoT World. We're a leading authority on industrial IoT topics. We're the first digital media outlet bringing the latest industrial Internet of Things virtual conferences and content to a global community of 270,000 plus decision makers. So with our housekeeping out of the way, I will do an introduction here for our panel that you see on the screen. We have Greg Valentine. He's the Security Director for Cybersecurity Center of Excellence at Capgemini. Rick Peters, the CISO for Operational Technology in North America for Fortinet. And Danielle Jablonski, Senior Research Analyst at Guidehouse. And we also have Roberto Gutierrez, who's the CISO of OSI Group. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to kick into our first line of questions here and discussion topics. So if you consider the rapid adjustments made in 2020 due to the pandemic that we're all living through, I mean, is there any one universal lesson that the whole manufacturing sector has learned or could have a takeaway? Roberto, I'd love to have you kick us off with a comment on that.
Thank you very much, Greg, and for the invitation as well. Well, many lessons learned from over the last year. The one that probably stood the most with me is just basically to learn to adapt and to act to unexpected situations. In a window between 2 and 4 weeks, we expanded our networks. We sent people to work from home. We allowed third parties just to come in and connect to our critical infrastructure directly to help us to support and maintain the operations that we were having while everybody was just retreating and working from home. So that's the one that stuck with me for sure.
Very good. No, thank you for the insights. I mean, if we move on to our next question, you know, the disruption did, I mean, it ushered in, you know, through the pandemic, you needed agility if you were going to adjust to this, you know, all manufacturing organizations did. So how can we apply the lessons learned to manage risk down the road or some of the things that are coming up ahead of us? Greg, would you care to comment on
that? Sure. Thanks for the invite, by the way, as well. Let me just start by saying never let a good crisis go to waste. It really is a good opportunity to stand up a cyber awareness training program, perhaps, or maybe enhance your business continuity, disaster recovery programs. Consider assessing, evaluating your secure remote access policies for your vendors, your employees, contractors, et cetera, and evaluate who needs access to what. You know, now more than ever, trust relationships should be identified, documented, monitored, and managed. So start thinking about considering a zero trust approach to access and letting people access what they need to access in order to get their job done. No more, no less. Nothing should be prevented from occurring, that shouldn't be prevented from occurring, but only let those activities take place that need to be taking place. Simplify, simplify. Improve your core resiliency controls. COVID threats and mitigations can appear to be similar to ransomware threats and mitigations. So your typical defensive controls that improve detection and recovery ultimately could provide business and operational resiliency while reducing potentially the impact when a breach should occur, if it happens to occur.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that the organizations, probably the vast majority, had some type of emergency response plan in place. But I'd venture to say that not many had a pandemic response plan.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, very good. So our next question, I'm gonna throw this one over to you, to Rick. What have we learned from recent cyber attacks? I mean, there's plenty that have transpired over the past decade or so, but on the more recent frontier, what could we learn that should influence how we approach risk mitigation for today's manufacturing environment?
Indeed, we have learned a lot, but we've kind of been reminded, I think, of the unethical nature, right, of cyber attackers or bad actors. They tend to amplify their disruptive campaigns at these opportune moments. When you might see a lot of innovation or societal changes, certainly it's their opportunity to move faster with greater agility. Access is the key. They'll use any and all means to accomplish that. From my prior life, it was very clear that they'll just as likely exploit and reuse legacy tradecraft. I think that's particularly true for operational technology. The manufacturers know that you have a lot of legacy hardware and software typically in those environments. So they will seek to exploit OT targets with that in mind, because if they can gain the access, then they can employ more advanced tradecraft, right? They may accomplish a period of reconnaissance on the target before they seek to elevate their privilege and then accomplish a multi-thread campaign. We just have to recognize that trend's been shown. I mean, certainly the recent headlines have amplified, the supply chain issues, the ability to use payload to get on target. And I think it's also amplified the notion of intelligence-backed situational awareness as something that's keenly important as you think about the total cybersecurity solution for operational technology.
No, interesting perspective. Thank you. Roberto, look at you. I wanted to say something.
Yeah, well, to me, it's always that since day one, we need to consider that our environments are always vulnerable, right? So we try to implement security controls everywhere that we understand that there is a risk, but there is not such a thing that security will have an endpoint. Security is a journey, is not a destination.
No, very good point. Very good point. So Danielle, I'd love your perspective on this one. What's the impact of emerging technologies? We hear about the Internet of Things, 5G. And what are the implications of the rush to deploy, given security hasn't been built into the advanced technology?
Yeah, I mean, so the implications of more digital components in any environment means more risk, right? There are a lot of metrics out there that indicate that increased connectivity means better business outcomes, but it's really up to the end user to investigate that, right? So questioning the ROI for any deployment is really important. I also think that given that security has not been built into these new technologies, there's really a need to have a plan when it comes to integration and a long lead time. Maybe you deploy a new deployment to one or two units, and then you roll it out further over the next year. I wouldn't go full stop. I'd really interrogate any system or vendor on their security. We like to throw around the phrase security by design, but a lot of people don't know what that means, right? It's kind of a slapstick a label that we like to use. And a lot of times it can inadvertently create, new avenues for exploitation or single points of failure, depending on the system. And so I would shy away from the shiny kind of buzzwords we hear in terms of integrations or my API works with this API, and just kind of bring it home. And the last thing I would say is that, there are some simplistic things that you can digitize that don't sound as great sometimes as the new shiny technologies, but they can really improve day-to-day processes that are pretty cumbersome for these environments and impact the bottom line. And they don't have to be kind of the next generation big AI or ML kind of solution. So, just be really intentional with the way that you roll things out and what you choose to roll out.
Oh, thank you. Greg, maybe if you could, I mean, how do you characterize the cybersecurity risk concerns for the manufacturing sector? I mean, it's a pretty broad spectrum of things we're dealing with here. Would you share
Yeah, exactly. It's impossible to assign a grade to an entire sector, but there are some manufacturing companies that we work with continually that are doing quite well, and that's great from a security maturity perspective. And then there are others that, let's just say they're lagging behind, and that's fine too, as long as they're looking to move in the right direction. The bottom line for a plant is often the significant driver for making cybersecurity decisions on the future. And this is a bit of an aside, but in my opinion, we should all be tagging cybersecurity directly to safety. Safety in the OT world has always been and always will be, in my opinion, number one. It's not for drama, it's just the reality of the situation. An insecure facility is inherently less safe than a more secure facility. It's riskier to be less secure. So improve your safety, the risk of your safety of your employees and the plant and the assets, et cetera, and look to improve your cybersecurity maturity levels. By doing this, you're elevating the criticality of cybersecurity within the budget cycle by tagging it directly to safety, as I was saying. I think it's the responsible thing to do. I also think it's the right thing to do. Some plants are a ticking time bomb, for to put it bluntly, but as offensive, something to be aware of is as offensive automation techniques improve over time, then manual legacy defenses will become more obsolete. So it's time to really raise the foundational level of your cybersecurity maturity level, including security as safety culture, right? You want to adopt that framework, that mindset. So whenever I'm talking with clients of ours, I'm always stressing that one way to help improve your safety record is to actually improve upon your cybersecurity resilience as an organization.
there's an aspect of prioritization in that too, that you never want to lose sight of that safety perspective. I think that's critical.
I'd like to, can I add just one point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Greg, before we move off, because I think Greg gave a great laydown on that, but I think we have to keep on top of mind that we, as much as we understand operational technology, we also are aware of that propensity, the appetite for data. There was a big push even pre-COVID to be more operationally efficient, and the drive to gain access to data. Of course, you attach that then to an enabled infrastructure out there with a growth in the attack surface, and you're challenged to make a proportional investment. And I think that's a big shift that's happening now to address what it means to neutralize by thinking about the entire manufacturing plant as a digital value chain.
Yeah.
Understanding how you break that attack surface down and being aware of where your weak points are. So I think that's a prescriptive way then to insist on earned trust to protect that entire environment from the inception of the idea all the way to the retail value chain.
Yeah, I completely agree. The IT and OT convergence has already occurred, to be honest. I mean, don't want to monopolize the conversation, but that's a topic that could go on for a while.
We'll have plenty of time later on this evening to dive deeper into that one as well. And maybe to that point, I mean, you hinted on it, Rick. I mean, how do you balance that growing appetite for data, with an expanded attack surface, given the industrial Internet of Things footprint, it's exploding, right? I mean, there's Gartner reports, there's several organization reports that are stating the number of devices that are going to be connected in the not too distant years. So I'd love to hear your, maybe even a little bit deeper dive. Maybe Danielle, start with your perspective, and then Rick, if you could jump in and share too, that'd be great.
Yeah. Okay. So I like this question a lot. And Rick and I have actually talked about this before. So the rush to integration, and integration is seen in both architectures and operations, as well as some of the new emerging technologies that promise integration across the board, things like digital twins and predictive maintenance. And with that, I would say, we can't use data as a Band-Aid for something that's currently inefficient or not digitized. And as an aside, I'll tell a quick little story. I was working with a client a number of years ago in a previous life at a different company. And they said, we want to build an eagle eye. We want to integrate all of this different data. We want to find X, Y, and Z. We want it to standardize across this machine and be really robust. And I said, great. how much of your information is digital right now, meaning it doesn't exist on paper in a filing cabinet? And the answer was 30%. So it's really difficult to work with that when you're talking about integrating data. But at the same time, a lot of vendors and new technologies promise that this fleet of webcams will and heat sensors will integrate perfectly with this digital twin, and you can access it from anywhere. And then your leaders can talk with your maintenance guys, and it's really seamless. And I go back to the fact that data cannot be a band-aid for something that's inefficient. And at the same time, if something works well that isn't digitized and isn't a major priority for digitization, it might not be worth it. And so back to what I said before, a lot of lead time, a thorough plan for a rollout, and then kind of ramping up once you see that something really works well and is worth the bang for your buck, then go for it. Rick?
Yeah, you know, that very question suggests a dynamic, doesn't it? I mean, you just start to think about how to tackle that problem proportionally. And you hear terms thrown around today like zero trust network access and earned trust. And I think it's important. It's an important dimension. You have to think about users and applications and devices, and you can even extend that now. And certainly, it's heightened awareness of what it means to trust all your supply chain partners. So there's a lot to think about in this space. And as Danielle pointed out, it's only a growth area that will continue to challenge those who need to proactively defend, not reactively defend. And I think we'll probably explore that a bit more.
No, very, thank you both. Kind of dovetailing into this. I mean, if you look at this big scenario that we're talking about, you know, from a manufacturing standpoint, how do manufacturers consider compliance, you know, and security in relation to their increasingly connected systems? I mean, where there's networks, internal, intra, external. What do you do with that, Greg?
This is a soapbox opportunity, and I'm
you got a box right there. Go
right. Let me keep it real though. The old adage is that compliance does not equal security, but it's a good start. That's true, but in reality, I think these are two separate things. Compliance is a set of base standards for cybersecurity across any given standards, manufacturing, oil and gas, chemicals, utilities, et cetera. But it's just that, it's a base, it's a minimum standard. Companies can and companies should do much more than that. Many frameworks and compliance standards are not enabling companies to have an overarching, customized, unique, best suited for their environment solution set. And so they aren't looking towards that. They're just looking to affect the minimum so that they don't get hit by any particular audit penalties, et cetera. Now, many companies have gaps, that's fine, but the truth is that in reality, you need to have compliance in check because you don't want to spend it, you know, you have to pay fines, et cetera. But at the same time, you need to look at security from cybersecurity's own sake, right? So identify risk across your business, across your operations, across your supply chain, you know, especially supply chain, right? This is top of mind right now for most people. And then you can take a look and try to identify at least the impact of each of these gaps. And from that, you can build a targeted remediation plan to meet the most impactful and likely of these threats. That's key. You always want to work intelligently, right? Compliance should be met to ensure you're covering yourself, right? And meeting the minimum standards. And some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't make sense between you and me. But always look to what more can I do to protect myself and my assets?
Yeah, very good. So let me see here, Roberto, you know, there's a lot of things out there. There's a lot of point solutions that are connected. And how do you balance the push for more data to improve decision-making when the fact that these systems are out there, but they're not integrated?
This is the single pane of glass vision that we all security professionals have in our dreams, right? So one place that you can go and look at where are my risks sitting? Where are my gaps in control? Reality is that very few vendors are truly connected or collaborating, which make it even more difficult to achieve. And the security solutions offering is a never-ending story. So we get bombarded every day with the new shiny object just to solve the same problem that we've been trying to solve for a few years now. I balance it by trying to be more comfortable with operating with my hybrid environments. That's the reality, right? So we have multiple solutions. I try to use aggregation of data where I can. We are manually achieving that, not necessarily to be the most effective way to do it, but that's the way that we are doing it, right? So there should be also an acceptance for continuous assessment of risk. You need to try to understand your technology, your infrastructure, and continuously see where are your gaps. Technology, again, is a never-ending story. Technology evolution. And there are certain vendors that have really truly connected solutions that I really consider very effective, and those are the type of vendors that we are trying to move forward into integrating into what we have operating in our environments.
No, thank you, Roberto. Danielle, maybe the second question, I'll let you comment on this. Before you start adding new solutions to a security or network operations center, I mean, how do you leverage technology that's already there?
Yeah, so I'll kind of dovetail on what Roberto said. Whenever I think of this in terms of analytics and decision making, I kind of go back to psychology and what we've learned from that. And that is the thinking and feeling brain, right? System 1 and 2 thinking. And your operations need to be that gut reaction. You need something to work when the command line is there. And the feeling side is where we should implement security. And that is, being able to interrogate what happened, why it happened. Did we plan for it, prepare for it? Was it authorized? Those kinds of things. Wrapping your head around those ideas is much simpler than learning all of the security jargon that you might need to operate with a vendor in mind. And then I would say, using what you've already got to do planning and analysis that is a testing phase, right? So not penetration testing, which is a hobby that I think we all kind of share, but even a 2-hour meeting where you talk about the worst case scenario for my team or yours, the priorities, the breakdown in communication, maybe the hierarchy in your organization, who does what, when, and why when something goes wrong. That can actually unearth a lot of intelligence and useful data that you might not know you have there for in terms of like incident response or what to do during a cyber attack. And then other than that, there are a ton of really great frameworks out there that are free that I think have already been mentioned that just look at, do we know what software is running where? Do we know the last time it was updated? Do we not know that? Well, let's write that down, right? So there's a lot of great resources out there to help you just get started, learn the lingo, and understand why what is important and where it lives.
No, great perspective. Situational awareness is key. All right, Greg. So the next one is for you. How do you respond to those that say that their operational equipment is fine, it's protected, there's an air gap?
More soapbox material. All right. So in my opinion, air gap is just doesn't exist anymore, truly. Let me turn things around and ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Do you have any vendors that remotely connect into your facilities? If so, how secure are those vendors when they connect? And then let me ricochet off of that. How confident are you in those answers? Because just because the vendor assures you of something, do you have a way of validating that? Do you have any remote users like employees or general contractors or third-party contractors? Do you have any rogue access points that employees or contractors use that they bring in to help get their job done more easily? Does anyone, contractors, employees, whatever, bring in USB thumb drives to get any work done? And then objectively sit down and think about how confident you are in those answers, right? Air gapping is a bubble. It gives you a false sense of security, and really all it takes is one opening to burst the bubble and bring it all down, right? So just don't rely solely on something like an air gap and then be confident that you've got things covered. It's a multi-dimensional, multi-level challenge that you still need to take into account, even if you are confident in your air gap.
Rick, you're dying to chime in. I can see.
I just want to foot stomp Greg's points because I think he's just all over it. From my intelligence community background, access was always the key, and the human element was the greatest imperfection in the entire environment. That's where uncertainty typically comes into the equation. And if I'm sitting down with an executive privately or in a boardroom, that always comes up. And then technology adds a whole nother layer of uncertainty, right? This disposition of all the connectivity that Greg just talked about. But I think there's also this notion of confusing air gapping with, the lack of or opportunity to connect. Certainly there are strategies out there that aren't true air gapping that still accomplish that. Microsegmentation is a great example. I can establish zones of control or a containment strategy, and that's really important because when an event occurs, then it allows me to contain the problem. And I think that's a key point to being successful on a more proactive, from a more proactive position.
Yeah,
Completely agree.
Great insights indeed. So I always like to throw a question like this in. I mean, we've got an audience of people that are embarking on these journeys right now, and they're at various stages, they're various sizes. Some of them are small mom and pop, some of them are Fortune 50 organizations. What are one or two practical steps, that a manufacturing organization can take away, from this discussion and go apply tomorrow or even later today before the happy hour?
So, let's start by being practical about it. And my guidance typically would be to say, know your own. And by that, we're talking about what represents your most valuable assets or targets to the adversary. Is that your cyber physical plant? Is it your intellectual property? Both. By that, I mean crown jewels, recipes, trade secrets, whatever it is that separates you from your competition. That's what I'm going after. I'm going to try and accomplish and exfiltrate that intelligence. You can almost bet on it. I'll figure that out. And I think, on the flip side of that, you have to insist on complete visibility. You have to be able to think about how to extend that knowledge space and be able to protect and recognize the dynamic nature of that challenge. It's not just a static inventory of assets you're trying to protect. And then I think you have to think inside out. I really think when you start to commit to a strategy that accepts that your system's likely going to be breached at some point, you posture yourself then to say, guess what? I'm going to work more proactively to outmaneuver that adversary. I'm going to start by identifying and quarantining, doing the analysis, but I'm going to do it at the speed of business so that I'm situationally aware and not in the chase mode, because as we know from all of the case studies you can read over the last even 12 to 18 months, that's a lose-lose game in operational technology.
Can I just add to that too?
Sure.
A really practical note that I like to leave folks with is be careful what you're bolting on and what you're building from the ground up. It's really important to analyze why you do which. And if you don't do the asset inventory, you're not going to be able to bring in a third party to do any type of detection over prevention if you don't know what's important and what's critical in your own operation. So just there's a lot of bolting on going on out there, and a lot of kind of shallow promises in terms of what can be done to secure something if you don't know what is in your environment already. Like Rick said, that visibility piece is key.
A great point, Daniel. Roberto, you look like you want to say something as well, please.
Well, yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to add another one. And to me, is for those information security professionals that are in the forum today, and for those engineering professionals that are also sitting here, starting tomorrow, starting today, if you can, build those relationships. For information security professionals, it's always important to have a seat on that table while a plan is trying to implement a new technology. The earlier that you get to know, the more secure that deployment will go, for sure. Same other way around. So for manufacturing folks, security is sometimes not their core skills or knowledge, even though I have come across very strong professionals around that. But still, bringing their security folks, they know the IT side that will be connecting to your OT side, and will allow a door just basically into your critical components. So build those relationships and foster those relationships as much as you can.
Yeah, Rick, I'm gonna ask you this one first. What's the guiding path for this? I mean, how do you help organizations down this path? To take evaluating the security maturity. Do you need to regroup? I mean, what's kind of the first steps that organizations should embark upon?
So a couple of thoughts that I think will resonate with most everyone, and that is, the best cybersecurity practices, they're well known. So you need to adopt a framework that enables you, and I'll say NIST cybersecurity framework as an example, allows you to identify your gaps, your pain points, because it's broken down, right? And it allows you to develop sort of a continuous trust assessment, because it is a 24/7 game. I think you also need to think about security maturity as a multi-dimensional challenge. We hear often, hey, it's people, process, and technology. That is so true. And I'm encouraged because I'm hearing more corporations talk about the gamification of what it means to protect their environment, to encourage their employees, and really flip the script from employee concern being a liability to an asset. It's never going to be perfect, right? Because as we talked about before, the human challenge is one that's hard to get around. And then it's also about getting the best return on investment for what you already have in place. And I think finally, it's recognizing that OT security is a team sport. If there's somebody out there trying to convince you they've got it all solved, you probably ought to show them the door, because it really requires a collaborative bit of engagement to be comprehensive, to be resilient in that space.
If I can just tag on to that,
Yeah, please, Greg.
thanks. I completely agree with that, and it just kind of stands on top of what was said earlier. This is a journey. In my opinion, it's all about increasing your visibility, as other people have said already. For us, in my role in this cybersecurity world, the best first step seems to be to have a cybersecurity maturity assessment, possibly with an asset inventory program built in as well, because you can't protect what you don't know about. Now, be aware, I guess aware is the right word. Be aware that this is not an audit type of a conversation. You want to have a partner come in and have a conversation with you. You don't want them to say, all right, do you do X? Do you do Y? How often do you do antivirus signature updates? Stuff like that. That's not as helpful, in my opinion, as an actual conversation about your culture as an organization. What does the company feel about cybersecurity? What does senior leadership feel, and what is their support level for cybersecurity programs? Look for a partner to come in and ask you the conversation leading questions. Do vendors remotely connect to your environment? That's a simple yes or no question, but then the follow-on would be to dig into the identity and access management elements. What access controls are in place? Where can they go? Are they prevented, or are you just trusting them? Things like that. And then everybody will always get a nice prepared formal report that shows you all the different gaps, because everybody has gaps, and that's important. But look for something constructive that comes out of the conversation, out of the engagement. You want somebody to give you hopefully a prioritized list of, here are your gaps, and this is a listing of the criticalities of them, from most critical to least critical. Bonus points if they also include something like a level of effort for each element. So now you can see criticality list, and you can see how easy and how difficult each thing is, and you can marry the two and come up with the most effective way to improve your cybersecurity maturity as quickly as possible. A good assessment is not an audit, completely different things. It'd be like comparing compliance with a good cybersecurity assessment. They're just, the output is completely different. That's it for me.
No, I think that's a great summary. It's not a checkbox. It's peel the onion, right? Get in there, find the layers that are buried deep beneath that.
Exactly.
Fantastic discussion. I'd love to transition now. I know we've got questions coming into the Q&A and open up a conversation to the audience. So once again, please feel free to shoot those into us in the Q&A window here. If we have time to get through all of these, we will. We also have a couple surveys that you'll probably see popping up here. Please do include your candid response to us, good, bad, or ugly. We don't grow if we don't realize what we're doing and what we need to improve upon. So those will be popping up here as well. So please do that. And I'm going to move us right into some of our audience questions here. So without further ado, I think I see one here from, okay, so this one's from Jonathan. What would a fair to good security architecture look like? And where do we draw the line between customer responsibility and supplier? Compliance for PLC data, at rest encryption, store and forward, port security for outbound streams, cloud repositories, data visualization, BI tools, etc. So who would like to tackle that? Rick, you want to take a stab at that?
Wow, that's a big one. So let's start with the fact that you can't transfer your responsibility. It's your corporate environment, it's your enterprise. To the degree that you're connected, and the degree of your cybersecurity maturity is something you have to own. A lot of corporations today in the manufacturing domain are wrestling with, how do I trust, right? The supply chain risk thought process has been amplified. We know that, we're aware of that, but guess what? There are going to be others that seek to mimic exactly what we've just seen portrayed, right? From finding a way onto a disparate array of targets, and I might be one of them, to maybe feeling good about the fact that I've been omitted from the recent array of activity, but then looking in the mirror and suggesting, okay, it's time to get serious about taking my own inventory and asking myself, how ready and resilient would I be if I were on that target list? And how responsive would I be? And it isn't about turning to the left or to the right and figuring out who else is responsible. The decision is your own. The corporate executive is driving the train to being resilient. And we did mention earlier about the proportional investment. That's a challenging thing in 2021. You know, pockets aren't deep. And so everyone's looking for a large return on investment for the spend. And they want it to be relevant. They want to be able to see and evaluate, get some metrics that give them some value so that they are protecting data, whether it's at rest or in transit, on-prem, or through an extended environment. I'm going to quiet down and let someone else chime in now.
Any takers? Danielle, go for it.
Sure. Yeah. So something I was thinking of in the last response too is there's a lot of friction in that, and it's a reliability question at the end of the day. Reliable operations fall on the person operating, right? And so there's a lot of finger pointing that can happen, but and we also talked about a couple of the frameworks. I personally like consequence-driven frameworks. I think that they maximize ROI. And so it's kind of cheeky, but I also tell people, lean into the friction, right? Lean into what you think might work manually and might not, based on the worst case scenario and the consequences of that. And those scenarios really don't matter. It doesn't matter who your vendors are, right? Or what security they have. If as an end operator, your reliability is to be operational, functional, and safe, then the consequence and the reliability is on you. Therefore, the planning and the spending and the prioritization and challenging some assumptions you might have that could fall through also falls on you. So.
Very good. Thanks, Danielle. Once again, I think we got a poll question popping up, so feel free to jot that one in there in the mix. Hey, Larry's got an interesting question. Speaking of ROI in cybersecurity, or risk management in general, it's much more straightforward to measure the costs versus benefits. So, are you aware of any best practices for measuring costs that you can share?
Is it supposed to be measuring benefits? The end of the question. There are straightforward ways to measure costs.
I'm not sure, Larry. I don't want to misquote you, or so if you're still here and you want to respond to that one, go right ahead, and maybe we'll move on to another.
Either way, I mean,
oh, Larry's here. Yes,
There
measure benefits. Yeah. There
we go.
So, I mean, Danielle, I don't know if you wanted to start, but
go ahead.
Well, my thought is this topic comes up a fair amount at Capgemini, where people want to be able to measure and quantify, which completely makes sense. I get it. But it's very challenging, as you obviously have already come across, to measure ROI for something that you hope never is tested, right? It's almost, it's what is the cost of an insurance policy, right? That's always the example that I give. Yes, it's a good thing to have. It's a great thing to have just in case of break glass, something occurs, but I don't know how you would quantify that, to be completely transparent.
So I'll be really brief because I feel like I'm monopolizing a little bit. I don't have as much defense background as Rick does in national security, but I did work in counterterrorism for a stint, and it's really difficult, right, to tell you how many attacks didn't happen or how many attacks were prevented in that field, and that leads to a lot of spending on a lot of different security measures that the ROI is a little bit fuzzy, right? And so I've seen some new work on the threat intelligence side of looking at what threat actors do, how they change their prioritization or their access points or their operations in terms of adversarial cybersecurity and what we're trying to protect against. I know that's a difficult one to quantify, but it is something that we can track, right? And so I've seen some work around the cost of ransomware. Then the numbers that they ask for have actually gone down, even though the rate of attacks has gone up. But this move towards detection is actually detecting ransomware quicker catching the backups and things like that, to where we can bring companies online faster. So they're asking for less money, so that maybe that risk analysis in order to pay happens quicker because it's less money. And so if you're really looking at what the attacker is doing, and there's a lot of really good companies actually that do kind of like monthly updates of threat intelligence, that could be a way to, over 5-10 years, kind of quantify, are we doing the right things that are keeping these types of attacks at bay in our organization?
A great point, Danielle. I just want to add that, in 2021, I think things are amplified on the defensive side to the extent where it is becoming maybe just a little bit more glamorous. It's always been more fun to break things than fix them. And the offensive side has always been considered more glamorous. And the defensive side is keep things safe and operational. We heard continuous safe operations before. That's absolute in OT. So the value of that has to go up, and it has to go up because the landscape is so much more challenging in 2021, and that's not going to change.
No, great. No, great insights. Thank you both. Alex, we've got here's an anonymous question. How do you quantify the value of cost of not including security in an IoT system versus the cost of implementing a system? Is it different from a new versus legacy system? I think you're already on this one, Greg. I see you typing, so if you want to chime in, go for it.
But yeah, this is, as much as compliance is a challenge for me, compliance, this is an easy one for compliance. Because there are very definite fees, and you can very easily calculate what the price would be or the cost would be if you don't do the bare minimum. Right, and so I would start there, and then proceed, as Danielle was saying, look at threat intelligence and see what other things are active in your area or your industry, and how you can protect yourself from those, and what the impact would be if they attack your environment.
Can I chime in again just briefly?
I
also would challenge the manufacturing industry to share more information, even with competitors, because that has been, impactful in other industries where, you don't actually have to pay attention to the worst case out there right now, as long as you're kind of having open dialogue with other like-minded individuals, other like organizations, and information sharing can go a long way. And it can also actually push data standardization, which is desperately needed across the IoT universe. But the vendors aren't going to initiate that themselves, right? Because it'll take more time to deploy their solutions. So if the actual end users can get together and say, this is what we need in order to buy this and deploy this as a type of standardization in terms of security or interoperability or, file type, et cetera, that can go a long way to increase security as well.
Great. Well, we've got time for probably a couple more, maybe one. So we've got a question here from Richard. I think, Roberta, you might actually be looking at this one as well. Is the Purdue security model alive and relevant in 2021 from a cybersecurity perspective?
Yeah, thank you for that. I strongly believe yes. Actually, it has been adapted now to understand that IoT and IIoT is coming to stay, and it can access at different levels of the Purdue model data. So it's still valid. To me, segmentation, which is pretty much what the model is all about, is core to ensure that appropriate cybersecurity is in place. Yes, IT and OT are converging, but we still have the responsibility to make sure that it's harder for the bad actors to get to what is critical to you, what is critical to your revenue generation. So I strongly believe yes, and actually I'm currently using it.
If I can tag onto that, I would say yes, I agree, but very few plants and facilities that I've been to are strictly adhering to the Purdue model. There's always a 3.1, a 3.2, a 3.3, et cetera. So Purdue is what, 20 plus years old now. The idea of segmentation is a fantastic idea, and while they were looking at it from an operations standpoint, it is a really good cybersecurity foundation as well. But it's a start, right? You look at the Purdue model as a starting point and then expand on that to ultimately maybe even micro-segmentation, but start with Purdue.
Completely agree.
Outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a fantastic panel. I learned a lot myself. So it was a wholehearted thank you to all of you, Greg, Rick, Danielle, and Roberto, for sharing your thoughts, insights, experience, and knowledge. A special thanks to Fortinet for sponsoring today's session, and the rest of our sponsors, Alientia, Canvas, Eurotech, Hitachi Vantara, HiveMQ, Fortinet, Locent, Trend Micro, Ursa Leo, Vertex, and WellAware. Your support ensures that we're able to continue to provide this type of insightful content to you. Thanks to the attendees for listening and engaging. Some fantastic questions today. So I'd also like to invite you to attend our networking and key takeaways session from 6 to 8 p.m. this evening. We hosted on Clubhouse. Now, the details to log into that event are provided inside the agenda. So if you're an iPhone or an Apple user, you should enjoy the festivities later this evening. So it's time to move on to our next session, Emerging Use Cases and Market Structure in Industrial IoT. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Cheers,
Thanks, everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe.